a an argument about God. Imagine this. How big of an idea? How big of a thing am I saying now? An argument about existence, pro-argument about existence of God, explained by top scientists, a chemist and a philosopher of science, a geophysicist, I believe, by trade. Anyway, I'm gonna play Mountain Blade, Burning Empire's mod. I believe mid-late era Roman times. I mean, duh, right? It's our style, so you're gonna be bewildered at what you're gonna hear. Okay? Alright. I'm gonna leave you with it.
Now, with chiral-induced spin selectivity, is that you have to have had near perfect chirality at the start of life. It's not something that you could have evolved into. Dave in his video likes to just say, oh, he just blows it off. He says, this is something esoteric the tour talks about. No, just because you can't answer it doesn't mean that it's esoteric.
This is the chemist.
It's a real thing.
Hi, I'm Steve Meyer from Discovery Institute Center for Science and Culture, and we have taken a particular interest in this spirited exchange that's been taking place on the internet between Dave Farina, also dubbed Professor Dave, and Professor James Tour of Rice University. Dr. Tour is one of the most distinguished scientists in the world, rated one of the top 50 scientists in the world. He has 600 peer-reviewed publications or more, and 150 some odd patents. He's a specialist in organic synthesis and nanotechnology.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons.
Professor Dave is an internet blogger who has a tremendous following online and has brought to the attention of many the controversy over the origin of life and what's called evolutionary abiogenesis.
Hey everyone, it's been quite some time since my two-part series demolishing every last one of James Tour's ridiculous talking points.
He's been a staunch critic of Dr. Tour and some of Dr. Tour's videos, and I wanted to just start, Jim, by asking you about this controversy, why you decided to weigh in the first place.
They don't mess around.
Some might have seen it as a bit of a mismatch between a person of your eminence and an internet blogger. Why did you decide that this issue needed to be engaged in the way you've engaged it?
Well, I have nothing in particular against Dave Farina. I was just minding my own business, giving my own talks, and he came out with a video called "Elucidating the Agenda"
I think this
of
guy's
James
in New
Tour,
Yorker,
as if I had some
chemist.
agenda behind speaking on abiogenesis, and my work is always just trying to expose the current work in abiogenesis and origin of life research, and I think do the work that reviewers should have done when those papers first came out, because I felt that actually that work screamed out that this could not be how life actually formed. And so when he came out with this video, every slide that he showed in the video was wrong. Every slide was wrong, and he has many viewers, and I thought, well, it'd be good to straighten this out, and so I came out with a 13-part series on abiogenesis, but I had to go through a lot of the background chemistry, and in doing that, I never called Dave Farina stupid. He says I called him stupid over and over again. I never called him stupid once. I never did, and I just talked about the science that was there, and I said that Dave was wrong. He was wrong on every point that he had made on that series, and so I just pointed that out.
Oh yeah, sorry to interrupt. So you had a series of, I think, from what we've seen, very informative videos about the problems facing attempts to explain the origin of life from simpler non-living chemicals. And maybe we should actually start there just for our listeners and viewers. There are two branches of evolutionary theory. There's the chemical evolutionary theory, which attempts to explain how you get the first living cell from simpler non-living chemicals. And then there's biological evolution, which attempts to explain how you get new forms of life from simpler pre-existing forms. Your videos addressed only that first issue, the origin of the first life from simpler chemicals. And so anyway, you put that series out, And then Dave Farina came back with some more videos challenging you. But this time, he cited a lot of experts in origin of life research, origin of life biochemistry, and I think that's given you a little bit more of an opening, I think, to have a scientific discussion at a high scientific level. I think you were probably not wanting to have to engage an internet blogger on these things, but due to the misinformation, I think you felt you had to. But now you're able to address some of the leading figures in the field, because those are the people he cited in his critique of you. Is that where we are in the discussion?
Right. So the good thing that Dave did is he brought on 3 experts to address the chemistry that I had talked about in my videos, and those 3 experts. And then he brought on 3, and then he cited several others, and so that's good, because now I can engage, particularly with those 3 that were presumably addressing my video. And I could go right after their science and talk about that.
Oh, and that's what we want to talk about. And I think, just again, as another preliminary, I would say that another good thing that Professor Dave has done in citing these experts in critique of your work is that I think it enables his viewers and our viewers to really assess the standing of these arguments that are being made in support of evolutionary abiogenesis. I had a supervisor in Cambridge when I was doing my PhD on origin of life biology, and he used to say, beware the sound of one hand clapping. If there's an argument on one side, there's bound to be an argument on the other. And you really can't assess, he said, the strength of an argument until you see how well it withstands criticism. And I think that applies to to your critique of evolutionary abiogenesis, but also Professor Dave's critique and the experts he cites critique of yours. So we have the arguments out there, and let's revisit them, and let's let our viewers hear your side of the story, and then people can begin to evaluate this for themselves, as both sides of the story are increasingly out in public.
Abiogenesis is the origin of life from non-living matter. And to construct any convincing theory of abiogenesis, we must take into account the condition of the Earth about 4 billion years ago. These are not my definition. These are textbook dictionary definitions. All right?
You've given a lecture, and it's a very detailed lecture with a lot of science in it. And the expert on the other side of the question that you critique and cite is a man named Steve Benner. So we're going to get into some of his work and his claims, but maybe we could start with just a basic definition of life. I mean, because my supervisor used to say that behind every question about the origin of life lies another question, which is, what is it that we're trying to explain the origin of? Or as Alexander Oparin used to put it, one of the early chemical evolutionary theorists, the question of the origin of life and the nature of life are inextricably linked. We can't come up with a good origin of life theory unless we know what we're shooting for, what life is. So how do origin of life researchers and how do molecular biologists or cell biologists define life today?
Well, I think that defining life, as you know as a philosopher, is hard. Defining the characteristics of life is actually a much easier thing to do. And we know that all life as we know it is made out of cells, and you have a membrane on the outside, and you have DNA inside, and you have a lot of machinery going on in there, and you have to have 4 classes of chemicals. You have to have the amino acids, which are the building blocks of the proteins. You have to have carbohydrates or sugars, which are the building blocks of the polycarbohydrates or the polysaccharides. You have to have the lipids, which are the membrane, and then you have to have the nucleic acids, which are the DNA and the RNA. So you have to have those four classes of chemicals, and then you have to have a functioning system that has something called homeostasis, where there's this internal functioning and operation of the system. It is not just throwing a bunch of molecules inside a lipid. It is a whole functioning together. It is a system. It is a factory in a sense. These are the characteristics of life as we know it. And what some people are trying to do is they have said for years that they'll address this and they'll make this happen, and they've not been able to get close. So now they're trying to redefine what life is. Even the same people that have defined it the very same way that I have, these characteristics, are trying to now change the argument, which is, as you know, is a typical philosophical approach to do that.
Yeah. So they attempt to define life down to some simpler essence or some simpler combination of molecules and say, well, that's all we really need to explain. But the fact is that life with the characteristics that you described exists on this planet. And if we want to even get the biological evolution going, we've got to start with at least a functioning cell. So, and those cells have membranes, they have carbohydrates, they have proteins, they have nucleic acids, and they have intricate interactions. We've got an information storage, transmission, and processing system inside the cell. So that's what exists. We have to get to that point if we're really going to provide an explanation. I think that's been a great point that you've made. So let's discuss some of the general problems that origin of life simulation experiments have encountered as they've attempted to simulate the origin of those four classes of molecules. You have noticed that there's an awful lot of what's called in the field investigator interference. Can you describe some of the problems that have been encountered under that heading?
Well, certainly investigator interference means that investigators are doing all the work. And even with all the investigators doing all the work, with very intricate work, they have not been able to make any of the four classes of chemicals that are needed for life. Nobody has made the chiral lipids, the lipids that are needed, where you have made the two enantiotopic hydroxyl groups of glycerol you've been able to distinguish those two enantiotopic groups. Nobody's ever been able to control any of the stereocenters there. Anything that anyone has made is not homochiral. And even what they've made is with, talking about interference, is with this deep hands-on chemistry using many, many steps that is very hard for nature to use. And their syntheses are all cheated. They cheat at every step of their synthesis, meaning they'll mix A and B, they'll get a series of compounds. They only want one in that series, and they'll identify a little bit of it, a very small amount, in a machine, in an HPLC. But they won't take that and carry it on because it's too messy. It cannot be used. So they'll buy that fresh material from a manufacturer that isolates that from cellular sources, from something that has had life already, and then they'll take that on to the next step, and they repeat that over and over again. So every step
is cheating. Is that to prevent what are known as interfering cross reactions then in prebiotic synthesis? So you have a couple of reagents, you combine them, and then you get lots of byproducts. And if you and maybe one of them is something you want, but if you allow that to continue to react with all the other things that have been produced, you're going to end up with a sludge, or I think one of the products was called melanoidin in one of those reactions I remember studying. So you have to purify and remove those other byproducts, or else you just go and buy the one you want and start the next stage of the reaction all over again. Is that kind of what goes on? And
that's exactly what goes on. They put upon early Earth constraints that they themselves cannot even deal with. And with all their instruments, they will make it in such a mess that they themselves cannot even isolate it. But they leave this to early Earth. That's early Earth's problem, not my problem, they will say. Mm-hmm. They won't say that, but they'll infer that, and then they'll move on. So every step is a cheat. Every step screams out that this cannot be the way that early Earth did this synthesis. Cannot. So, even with all their work, they have never made homochiral material.
Well, yeah, and let's talk about homochiral. What does that mean? I remember from chemistry, you've got amino acids come in left-handed and right-handed forms, and sugars come in left-handed and right-handed forms. Are all the four basic types of chemicals that are necessary for life, are they all chiral in the sense that they have two different types of forms or more?
Yes, every one of them. There's a couple of amino acids that don't have stereogenic centers, but everything else has a stereocenter. Actually, there's an amino acid that doesn't have it, but everything else, all classes of compounds have this. All amino acids, save one, all the carbohydrates, all the nucleotides have multiple stereocenters, not just one. And then the lipids have multiple stereocenters, and they've never controlled any of those in any synthesis that's prebiotically relevant. Meaning
and
that,
go ahead. I was going to say, what does that mean practically? Why do they need to be controlled? What's the
right?
What's
So
the
prebiotic
constraint?
relevance means that I cannot use these very sophisticated protection group schemes and catalysts that I've designed over a period of 150 years in modern chemistry, particularly in the last 50 years. We can control stereocenters now. We can do that sort of thing. We can separate these sorts of mixtures using our very sophisticated instruments. But when we say early Earth would never have that advantage, then we have to use only the chemistry that would be available on a prebiotic Earth. In other words, we're not using any of the sophisticated chiral-inducing agents that we have available to us today in our modern laboratory. That's what I mean, that a synthesis that has prebiotic relevance. They haven't even made ribose. If you can't make ribose, you can't make any of the
sugar, form of sugar, right?
It's a form of sugar. You can't make any of the
Just to chew it out for you guys. Basically, what he's demonstrating is that the theory of evolution is not based on science. It's faith. Because they haven't followed the scientific method.
the RNA or the DNA. You're done. You're toast. That's it. And so what everybody starts with, they buy ribose. And the syntheses that they have of ribose, they don't even use themselves. If you use very, very sophisticated hands-on chemistry, like what John Sutherland has done, you can make ribose, but it is not homochiral, meaning that you have both mirror images of it.
And why is that a problem? Why is if you have both mirror images of the sugar or of the amino acids or any of the other fundamental molecules, why is it a problem to have both mirror image versions of those molecules?
Right. So if you don't have just the one mirror image rather than both of them, you cannot do the assemblies that you need to do to make the life-type forms that you're going to need. And this is actually more recent work that's just come out in the last few years, work by Ron Naumann and some of his associates at the Weizmann Institute, that many people said, well, you know, you had stereo mixtures, you had the R and the S, you had the left-handed, the right-handed, and then over time it evolved and it purified. Cannot be. And what he has shown, there's something called chiral-induced spin selectivity, meaning that if you didn't have this from the beginning, you could never have gotten this chemistry to work, because these act as what are called spin valves. The electrons have to go down particular chiral environments, and when you have the mixture of isomers, it cannot work. So you have to have had the chirality at the start. It's not something that could have been evolved into.
Mm-hmm. So you can't form a protein with a mixture of left and right-handed amino acids. You have to have exclusively left-handed amino acids, and there's an underlying physical reason for that is necessary to forming a functioning protein.
That is correct, because these proteins, as you know, are catalysts. These are the enzymes or the nature's catalysts for designing experiments. What we thought is that all of this was just affected by the structure, so that it would influence how something came into it, how a substrate came into a cavity. What we've learned now is that there are electron transfers, and those electron transfers have to go down the prescribed chiral environment. So you could not have had this without having controlled that stereochemistry to begin with. The constraints get more difficult every year, because we're learning more about the cell and the chemistry involved in the cell.
Crazy.
So the constraints become harder. So the task...
And what's necessary to provide function, then, for all of these molecules.
Yes, and so the origin of life researcher is for any step forward that they think that they have made. They haven't made a single step forward. For every step forward they think they've made, there are many steps back every year as we understand more about the chemistry that is going to be needed for a living cell. And this nonsense, Steve, this nonsense that people say, well, cells were much simpler back then. No, this has already been computed by biophysicists, how simple a cell could be. What is the machinery?
Very important work on minimal complexity that's
Right.
established that minimally complex cell is awfully complex in ways that are quantifiable. I remember your comments remind me, Jim, of my last year doing PhD work on origin of life biology, and my supervisor had just come back from the ISOL conference, and she said, unfortunately our field is becoming populated by cranks. Everyone in the field knows that everybody else's hypothesis doesn't work, but they're unwilling to admit it about their own. That was 1990, and things have only gotten much worse in the ensuing 30-some years. So I feel your pain. But in general, I think what you're saying is that these simulation experiments, they don't take sometimes the experimenters claim they're taking a hands-off approach, but they're actually taking a very hands-on approach at every step along the way. Mm-hmm. So in order to move the chemistry in a life-relevant direction, there has to be repeated interventions by intelligent agents to restrict the degrees of chemical freedom to move things along in a direction that's going to be relevant to the actual origin of life. Is that the general problem with these interventions?
Yes, that's the problem. For example, if you take Steve Benner's work, where he says he always uses a hands-off approach. First of all, when he has his hands-off approach, he gets billions of compounds mixed together. He will never use it. He will go on to the next step, having bought totally pure material, homochiral material. He will buy from a manufacturer that's isolated this from a cellular source. And so he cheats at every step. And then when he has to have hands-on chemistry, he relies on the hands-on chemistry of others. And so it's just a big cheat all along the way. And I've told him this to his face. I mean, this is what we're dealing with here. And in
your little video that we'll embed in this video or link to it of your lecture to the student group at Rice, you show an interesting scientific figure. Is it an NMR scan with lots of different peaks? What does that show? Is that making the point you're making now, that when you do these simple reactions, you get not just the thing you want, you get a whole bunch of things, as indicated by this NMR scan. Is that right?
And it's totally useless, and he is able to identify ribose in that mixture, and so he claims ribose, and he goes on to the next step, having
but
bought ribose.
Why doesn't he just let it go forward naturally then, with all the compounds? They're going to interact, is that?
They're going to interact. Yeah.
You won't get what you want if you let that interaction take place.
Not at all. Not at all, and he knows that. He knows that, and
so he's a very smart chemist. That's why he circumvents the problem by buying the ribose off the shelf for the next phase.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And this is Dave Farina's expert. So Dave Farina brings us on, and in many ways, Steve, Dave Farina is the victim. He is a victim of what these guys are putting out there.
What?
All of this goes back to the origin of life researchers themselves. It is not the press. It is the origin of life researchers themselves. Oh. They get on this YouTube channel and they talk about what they've got. Dave Farina buys into it because he cannot read the actual paper and make sense out of it. He doesn't know how to read the paper and make sense out of it, so he's deceived by this. And this happens to many people. It's not just Dave Farina. The thing about Dave Farina is he's got a big audience. And so all I'm doing is I'm not coming against his audience at all. And in many ways, I'm saying poor Dave Farina. He's the victim. He buys into this so that when Benner says he's done hands-off chemistry and he's got these long nucleic acids, he's got this RNA that he said he has made. Dave can't assess this. He bought the precursors in highly pure form. He never made these precursors. No way. He says he made them. He never did. And then what he actually made, he never made RNA. It had both the 3-5 linkage and the 2-5, which means that it was hooked up the wrong way over and over again. And it even had branching. None of this could be usable. None of this. Steve Benner knows it. Steve knows it, but Dave Farina doesn't, and Dave Farina buys into this. The poor guy is a victim.
So the origin of life researchers overhype this stuff to the press and to others, and then people pick this up and then spread the hype, and then you come along and critique the overhyping of these things, and then you're the bad guy, right?
I'm the bad guy for,
you get criticized
for exposing this. And even what Steve Benner did is when he says some things in his paper that are way overhyped, and then when he goes to the press, he says, and now we have a consistent model for how you can get Darwinian evolution. I mean, to go from the junk that he made, he didn't even make ribose. But then when he bought ribose, then he brought it on the next step, quoting hands-on chemistry. He didn't even use that. He ended up buying the entire nucleotides that have a triphosphate on there that are ready and preloaded to polymerize. That's what he bought. And then these were isolated from cellular sources, from something that was already living. He bought that, and then he got these things to string together, but in a way that could never work because the zipper wasn't zipped together right. He had the wrong connections here. And then he goes on to make these extrapolations and say that this is even shows how you can get Darwinian evolution.
Brother.
It's a bunch of nonsense. It's such nonsense
Chill.
that even Jack Sostek, who himself can hype a lot of things, said that Benner has gone with the hype rather than with the science. It's not just me saying this now. And Jack Sostek is one of the other experts that Dave Farina refers to. He doesn't even realize that Jack Sostek is contradicting the work that Dave's other expert, Benner, is doing. So Dave doesn't even have the perception to understand that his own experts are not agreeing with each other. In many ways, as they critique each other, they agree with me.
So yeah, that's very interesting. It's just as a dynamic in the discussion here. Can we go back a little bit because I know what Benner is trying to do is to produce an RNA molecule, and the reason that RNA is so important now is that there's been this chicken and egg problem that's been involved in origin of life research forever. The realization that you need information, which is stored today in a DNA molecule, to produce proteins, but you need proteins to process and express the information on the DNA. So you have this chicken and egg, which came first. And in the 1980s, it was thought that, well, maybe the RNA could help us solve the chicken and egg problem because RNA stores information, but it also catalyzes at least a few of the kinds of a few of the reactions that some protein molecules will catalyze. So maybe RNA could be the holy grail, the information storage molecule, and also at least some kind of a catalyst that would be analogous to what proteins do in modern cells. And so the idea was that we'd get RNA that could self-replicate, copy itself, have variations on that RNA. That's the reference to the Darwinian evolution getting going on a molecular level, and then we'd be off to the evolutionary races. So if we could just build RNA, we'd be in good shape. I think that was the sort of the background to all of this. And so Benner has weighed in and said, hey, I can do that. I can show, not with hands-on chemistry, I can show hands-off chemistry how to build RNA. And as I recall, there's three main parts in the RNA. There's the sugars, the phosphates, and the bases, just like in DNA. But you're saying you can't even get the sugars, let alone the bases hooked up in the right way. So tell us just a bit more about that now that I've given a little background to.
So yes, you have to have the sugar, you have to have the ribose, and then you have to have the nucleobase. The nucleobases actually are pretty simple structures, and those can be gotten fairly simply. But now putting those on the ribose is not easy. And then hooking on a triphosphate is not easy. Very difficult chemistry to do this. Very hard to do this by hands-off chemistry. Even with hands-on chemistry, it's hard. But by hands-off, by what Benner says, he never did it. He says he does it with hands-off. He never did. He bought it. Why did he buy it? Because his hands-off chemistry doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I'm the bad guy for saying
pointing that out. You are a bad guy, Jim.
And poor Dave Farina is the victim here. I mean, he's really the victim.
Is part of the reason, Jim, that it's so hard to get these molecules to produce life-relevant compounds is that there's so many ways to hook them up that there's more ways to go wrong than there are ways to go right. Is that the essential problem?
Yes, that is the problem because with the nucleotides you can have both the 3-5 linkage, which is what you want, but you can also have the 2-5 linkage, and that 2-5 linkage throws you off. In fact, the 2-5 linkage can
act off at an angle or something.
It's not the right orientation. Plus, it acts as something called siRNA, meaning small interfering RNA. It interferes with the whole translation process. So the thing shuts down because it forms these duplexes which are too sticky. So when you get the wrong attachment there, and you see this sort of thing. In fact, I got Dave Farina to come around and to, in his second video, and to confess that yes, you cannot get polycarbohydrates, you cannot get these polysaccharides unless you have enzymes. He says, I knew that all the time. That's what I meant in my first video. No, that's not what he said in his first video.
Stop press. That's a very important concession, because enzymes in modern cells are built, they are proteins, and they are built with the information that's stored on DNA and transferred to RNA and through the ribosome and the whole protein synthesis process. So if you're relying in prebiotic chemistry on something that's only built by proteins, you're presupposing the existence of genetic information, the origin of which you have not explained.
Exactly. The origin of the information he doesn't even know. But he said that you can get these carbohydrates just keep hooking on to the end there. And then when I pointed out to him that there's all these different tentacles, these ways that you can do it, then he comes around in his next video, he says, yeah, but what I meant was that you couldn't do it until you first have enzymes. But what do you mean enzymes? Where did the enzymes get the information to hook these things together in the way that you want?
And if I may interrupt again,
Yes.
because this is even more, the more you talk about this, the more I realize how appalling these claims are, because the whole point of the RNA world was to build a self-replicating information storage molecule that could also function as a catalyst without enzymes and without DNA. So that we were going to circumvent the whole chicken and DNA protein chicken and egg problem by proposing an original synthesis of information-rich RNA molecules that could copy themselves and produce variants and get the evolutionary process going. But if you have to invoke enzymes to make the RNA world plausible, you have defeated the whole approach.
Well, in deference to Dave, he doesn't suggest that you need enzymes to make the RNA. He said you need enzymes to make the polycarbohydrates. But the same problem happens with RNA. You get the wrong type of attachment. If he's going to concede that you cannot make polycarbohydrates because there's too much variability in the coupling, if he's now conceded to that, which he did in his second series, in his second set of videos, if he concedes to that, why doesn't he have to concede to it with RNA as well? Because RNA can link by the 3'5" versus the 2'5". So if you're going to concede on the one, you have to concede on the other.
Because
you have the same problem.
The need for specificity in all these biopolymers is ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any of the biopolymers, you have this need for specificity. You have to have the specificity. You can couple in these different ways. And if you're going to concede that you're going to have enzymes to make the polycarbohydrates, which Dave has conceded to, then why don't you have to have it also to make the polypeptides? Because the polypeptides, half of them have active side chains that if you don't watch those end up participating, and then you get things that are not your proteins anymore, because you can get these opposite ways of attaching. That's the problem. You get these opposite ways of attaching. So if he's going to concede on the sugars, he has to concede on the RNA. If he has to concede on the RNA, he's going to have to concede on the peptides as well. But the poor man does not realize it. He's a victim because he believes what these guys say, and he's unable to read the papers to see what they really say. He's unable to discern them. And then he concedes with the carbohydrates, but he won't concede on anything else. But it's the same problem, the specificity problem.
It's going to be a bloody
So let's go
island.
back to Benner's claim then, who is a serious scientist. He's trying to make RNA. But in the first instance, as I understand it, he's just trying to get a stable RNA molecule. He's not worried about getting the nucleobases in the right sequence so that you actually would get self-replication, because there's an information requirement for that. He's just dealing with the more primary problem of building the parts and getting them to link together in some stable configuration that would represent an RNA molecule. Is that right? And what are the problems associated with just those steps, if I'm understanding it properly?
Well, he hasn't made RNA. First of all, he didn't make the ribose that you need for the RNA. He didn't make the nucleotide that you need. He didn't put on the triphosphate that you need. He bought it. All right, so that's the first problem. Early Earth.
He bought all of those constituent parts.
All put together. He bought all those constituent parts all put together in one piece. He bought it that way. And poor Early Earth, I don't know where Early Earth is going to buy this from. And then what he did is he allowed these things to polymerize, but they polymerized with no specificity. So not only did he not have the order, he had the 3,5 linkage and the 2,5, and he didn't even tell us how much of the 2,5. He just said it had a significant fraction of 3,5, which is what you want. What does significant fraction mean? Does it mean 2/3? Does it mean 9/10? Does it mean 1/3? He didn't tell us. Why wouldn't he tell us? Probably because it wasn't very good, because many people have made this random polymerization to make what could be RNA, and they come out and they tell you they've characterized it, and it's 70% of the wrong linkage or 30% of the wrong linkage. Let's give him on that low number. Let's say he only has 30% of the wrong linkage. So he has 60%, 66%, 2/3 of the right linkage. What does that mean?
Is it a moot point either way, Jim?
It's a moot point either way, because you need 3 bases
Byzantines.
have to be aligned in order to define what one amino acid is going to be. He can't even define one, not even a single one. And the other problem is, as you know, you can't just make one RNA and say, hey, I have this one RNA, and it just happens to be the right order to start building some amazing enzymes, and then you say it copies itself. RNA has never been shown to copy itself. The most it's ever shown in primed systems that were designed to copy themselves, not more than 10% has been
10%
copied.
is the
and that
upper limit.
10%
Yep.
is too short to make any copies
But even
of it.
there, that 10% is only will only ensue if there's a very specific arrangement of the nucleobases on the RNA molecule. In other words, there's a prior information requirement to get even that limited degree of self-replication.
Yes, it's primed to do this. Now, let's think about the stability of one RNA molecule, because even Joshua Swamizas says all you need is one molecule of RNA. How long will that one molecule of RNA last? Well, if there's magnesium chloride, it doesn't last long at all. So they want magnesium chloride when they want to do synthesis, but magnesium chloride will destroy RNA very, very quickly. It'll cleave because of this. So let's say there's no magnesium chloride in there. How long will that last? If its half-life, if the half-life of, say, 600 mer of RNA that will prescribe for just a 200 mer on a protein, just the half-life of that 600 mer, let's just say the half-life is a year. Well, how long will that molecule last? That molecule wouldn't even last more than a couple of days, under the best of conditions, just by the normal hydrolysis rates. When you have one molecule, you don't have enough to last you, because these things are going to cleave. It's the only reason we can work with RNA is because we make billions and billions of them at a time. We deal on Avogadro's number type systems. But when you only have one, its half-life, how long it's going to be retained will be not more than a day or two. That's it. It's going to cleave. So it's toast. It's over. Everything. Steve, this is frustrating to me. I hope you can feel my pain, because at every step, nothing works. Nothing works at every step that these guys talk about. I urge your folks to watch this. Go to Dr. James Tour on YouTube and watch this series, because I expose every one of these, and I expose now the actual researchers' claims.
Yeah, and I mean, in the simplest terms, the chemistry acting on its own does not want to move in a life-friendly direction. And
Never.
So to get it to move in that direction, you need repeated interventions from intelligent chemists who pretend that they themselves played no role in this, or that their interventions were, in a prebiotic environment, unnecessary. And yet the whole logic of what they are doing in performing simulation experiments is the uniformitarian logic of Charles Lyell, that the present is the key to the past. But if in the present they are actively intervening, they are not showing that undirected chemical processes would have been sufficient in the past. So there's a kind of deep problem. And you show so brilliantly in this lecture that we're going to embed in this video the multiple ways in which those interventions are accomplished by the chemists. Could you just say a little bit? There was you had quite a lot in the video about relay synthesis. Can you explain what that is and how that relates to this problem we've been talking about?
So relay synthesis is you take A and B and you mix it together. You want to make A coupled to B. Well, you get A coupled to B, but you get many, many different products along with that. You get A coupled to itself. You get AA, you get BB coupled to itself, you get ABA, so you get many different compounds. What the chemist does and what we do in our laboratory is you fish out the compound you want. Just say AB. You fish out that compound, you purify it, and when I say you fish it out, you use a lot of complex tools to be able to isolate that, and then you take that AB compound and you mix it in the next step. That is how synthesis is done. The way these guys do it, they'll make this mixture, and they'll say, well, we can identify it in there, but we can't isolate it because it's too messy. So what we'll do is we'll buy that AB.
It's too messy and not something that anything that would happen on a prebiotic earth without intelligent intervention. Yeah.
It's unusable, and they know it. And so they buy it pure and they go on to the next step. So at every step, they don't use the product that they've made. This is cheating at every step. You could never do this in a real synthesis. The early Earth could never do this, so they cheat at every step. They cheat at every step. And it's not just Steve Benner. If you look at the work of Lee Cronin, his lab is the most user input system. He has tubes and things piping in at exact times, and it's just so much information that is being put in there, and all he gets is junk. All the man gets is junk. He gets junk. He doesn't make the polypeptides that he says he makes, because when he uses real polypeptides that have active side chains, those interfere. And so you get different hookups. It doesn't work anymore. The chemistry doesn't work. And this autocatalytic junk that he says that he uses, these autocatalysis, he's making a bunch of rust that has nothing to do with life by his own standards of what life is. And then he mixes a little bit of oil and water and he says, hey, those are like cells. They're not like cells. This is a Marangoni effect that has been around for a long time, has nothing to do with cellular life, and they make these bold claims that this is life. It is not life, even by his own standards of what life that he has talked about. And so it's all a game. It's all nonsense that these guys are putting out there, and I'm exposing this. Poor Dave Farina is a victim, where he listens to what these guys say and he just nods there, oh yeah. And Jim Tour doesn't know any of this. Yeah. And he doesn't know. He just doesn't know because he doesn't go to their papers. And so what I do on my video series is I actually take not just the title page of the paper and show the title that Dave Farina does. I actually open the paper. I open the paper and we go through it. We go through the experimental section and we see what these guys have done when they say that they've purified it. When Lee Cronin says that the more material, he keeps adding in more material. Well, how on early Earth do you just keep adding in more pure material? But even when he throws in more pure material, he says it cleans up the system. It doesn't clean up the system. It's only because he took out the ones that had polymerized and fallen out. He's taken off the supernatant. So 30% of the material he's taken off at each cycle, and he says, well, you see, it's self-purifying. It's not self-purifying. You purified it.
You did it. The supernatant is the... Yeah, what's the supernatant?
Supernatant is the part that's in solution on the top, and all the other things went to the bottom.
Waste product.
They came
it's
out.
Essentially a chemical waste product of the reaction.
It's all his material keeps going, and he says, you see, it's self-purifying. It's not self-purifying. You purified it at every step. And even then, it was just a mixture, because he himself, in that series that Dave Farina put out, that two-part series, He put Lee Cronin in there a lot. Lee Cronin even said when you do the foremost reaction, you get billions of compounds in seconds to hours. Billions of compounds. And here, Dave Farina says, oh no, you can use the foremost reaction would make these things. No, I've said all along, they make junk. They make absolute junk. And poor Dave Farina. Dave Farina says, Jim Tour says, calcium hydroxide would be relevant. It's really not relevant. But then he himself shows a synthesis of calcium hydroxide. Then he brings on an expert Lee Cronin, he uses calcium hydroxide. He brings on an expert, Steve Benner, who uses calcium hydroxide, and Dave Farina doesn't even notice it. The guy doesn't even notice it. He doesn't understand chemistry. And the poor guy projects himself like he understands the chemistry. He does not. He does not understand chemistry, and he thinks in his own mind that he understands the papers, but he doesn't.
Yeah. And he's got a big megaphone, and I think that's why you feel that you've had to expose some of the hype and the false scientific claims that have been made.
And his listeners are not stupid, not at all. I mean, but they're not getting the true story. So all I'm doing is trying to show that there's a whole way that you look at this, and then you see what's exposed here. They're not getting a true story on this.
I did want to, before we close today, just put this in, maybe, again, contextualize it a little bit with these experiments, because to explain the origin of life, as you were talking about our understanding of the characteristics of the cell, there are kind of multiple levels of problems that have to be addressed. The first is to build the monomers, the small constituents and the constitutive parts of the molecules, the amino acids and the proteins, or the sugars, the phosphates and the bases in the DNA, or the different parts of the sugar molecules and the lipids as well. But once you get those, that does not by itself a cell make. There's another layer of problem, and that is, especially with the DNA and the proteins, there's the sequence specificity of the constituent parts. That's what we mean by the information. It's because those nucleotide bases on DNA and RNA are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written language, or like digital characters in the machine code. This was the great insight of Francis Crick and his sequence hypothesis, that these are literally containing information or instructions for building other molecules, the DNA for building the proteins and so forth. But then that's the second level. But even if you get the information-rich DNA and proteins, and there's specificity of arrangement involved in the lipids and sugars as well, we now know. But even if you get all those molecules with all the information they need, there's still an additional problem, which you discuss in your video about Steve Benner. And that's the 10 to the big number, 77 billion possible ways. Can you tell this huge number of combinations that are possible for the arrangement of just the protein-protein interactions? That's another, getting the right one of those possibilities is an additional problem as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, origin of life researchers never reflect on this. They don't want to go near it. So it turns out that there are other types of interactions. So of course we've been talking about the information interaction, where molecules are hooked up to other molecules by a covalent attachment, by a chemical bond. There's other types where molecules are just non-attached by a chemical bond, but they're interacting. They're close enough to interact. And there are these arrangements. These are called the non-covalent interactions. Those are turning out to be exceedingly important, because information flows through these packages through what are called electrostatic potentials. We've written papers on electrostatic potential interaction. And what happens is, when you get this non-covalent interaction that goes down these, you have to have a proper arrangement. Well, how can these non-covalent interactions, there's so many different combinations, how do you get the right ones? Well, the number of ways that you can align these is astronomically high, exceedingly high numbers on the ways you can do this, and only a small number of those are going to work properly. The arrangements can be between protein-protein, between protein-DNA, between DNA-DNA, between amino acid peptide chains, polypeptides, and other polypeptides. So you have all of these interactions going on that have non-covalent interactions, again, between different carbohydrate strands or carbohydrates and proteins. How do these align? Nobody ever addresses those. So
is this what's meant by the so-called interactome problem?
Yes, this is the interactome problem. It's called the Leventhal 2.0 paradox. The first Leventhal paradox was, how does a protein fold?
Right.
That's a big paradox. How do they fold without having other enzymes to act on them, to help them, to chaperone them into a fold? This is the 2.0, which is orders of magnitude, many orders of magnitude more difficult to think about how this could have happened. So you can't just take components and throw them into a lipid bilayer and expect them to ever work, because you don't have this information. And what happens is, when a cell is going to divide, it passes some of this information-rich material to each half. and then it clamps down on the middle, and it keeps propagating this, and then this to the next cell, and this to the next cell. So that's how the information propagates. It's not a random arrangement of these things. That's why if you ever take a cell and you dehydrate it such that you've even lost the waters of hydration between them to allow for this hydrogen bonding, then you can never bring the cell back to life, because you've lost all of this non-covalent interaction of arrangement.
So it's a Humpty Dumpty problem.
It's
as
a
well.
huge problem. It's a huge problem. And so origin of life researchers don't even want to talk about this, and most of them don't even know about the interactome problem. Most of them don't even know about chiral induced spin selectivity, which demands now that you had everything homochiral from the beginning. They want to avoid this. This is the problem, Steve. The target, what we're shooting at to make a cell, moves further away from us every year.
The more we understand about the complexity of the system that the origin of which we're actually trying to explain.
Exactly.
The problem gets harder and harder and harder.
The cell is not getting more complex. Our understanding of it is getting more complex, because 100 years ago we thought a cell just had a bunch of protoplasm in there. We had no idea of the complexity. And every year we're finding more complexity, and we're like, wow, I got to deal with this problem too. I got to deal with this problem too. These guys who work in Origin of Life are absolutely clueless on all of these issues, and even on the issues that they think they have figured out, it doesn't work. And that's why when people like Lee Cronin say that the primordial soup model is a good model, and then when I pin him down and say, you know, where is the goodness to your model? How do small molecules get to big molecules that can then form a cell? He has no idea, so he starts agreeing with me. Yes, we're clueless on this, how this happened. All we know is there was no life, and then there was life, and what happened in between, we don't know. So he ends up agreeing with me when you push him enough, but then when he gets on the program again, he says, the primordial soup model is a good model. He has no idea. He has no idea. This thing doesn't work. It absolutely does not work.
It reminds me of some conversations I had when I was doing my PhD on origin of life biology in Cambridge. There were very famous labs there, the MRC lab, and people doing a lot of chemistry and molecular biology and biophysics and so forth. When they'd find out I was working on this, oftentimes they'd kind of take me aside and say, "That's fascinating." He said, "What's the status of this?" And I'd say, "Well, really, pretty much no one has any idea how life arose by undirected chemical processes." And people would say, "I've always thought that myself. I haven't, what we get in the textbooks is so far removed from what seems like chemical reality. I've been deeply skeptical." But it would always be kind of in hushed tones, like no one wanted to admit that the emperor had no clothes. But you're doing a very good job, Jim, in exposing these deep and profound problems at the level first of building the constituent parts of those four classes of molecules, of the problems associated with getting the constituent parts arranged in the right way, and then the problem of getting the molecules to interact with each other in the right way. At every level you have these specificity requirements that haven't been solved. One last question, and this is for some, I think, perhaps the most counterintuitive thing that you are known for saying about this, because people have long thought that if there was just enough time, we could build anything by chance or by some sort of undirected self-organizational process. There was a famous scientist in the 1950s, George Wald, who used to say that chance was the hero of the plot, that given enough time, the improbable would become possible, the possible would become inevitable, and voila, you would have life just because you had so many interactions. But you've actually reversed that and says time is not the hero of the plot. It's not even working in your favor. It's working against you. Can you explain that?
Yes, because organic molecules decompose. They decompose rather rapidly. Under the very conditions in which they form, they decompose. And we show this over and over again. Even Steve Benner shows it in his own work, that these things decompose under the very reaction conditions in which they form. Typically in a formose reaction, ribose half-life, under the very conditions in which it was made, is 5 hours. That means you have half the amount of ribose that you had 5 hours before, just because of its decomposition under the very reaction conditions that it was made. So time is your enemy. That's why chemists who like to go home for the weekend and let their reactions just run always get bad yield. You have to watch that reaction, and you have to stop it as soon as the material that you want starts decreasing. You've hit the optimal, you hit the peak, you got to stop that reaction because it's going to decompose under the very reaction conditions in which it forms.
And then you have to intervene to scoop out what you want.
Yeah. And poor Dave reads a paper, and the paper says time is on our side. The author was using that as a colloquial expression, just using that as an expression, meaning that you had a thermodynamic product rather than a kinetic product. And he thought that where she was saying time is on your side, he said, see, now Jim Tour's going to have to pay attention to this. The poor guy didn't even understand. He doesn't even understand a poetic expression when it's used in this paper versus what's really there. I mean, it's just so painful for me to listen to his interpretation of these papers. But I'm going to come out with all of this. So have your viewers keep an eye on Dr. James Tour. Go to that YouTube channel and subscribe, and you'll see when these things are coming out, because they're going to start coming out very soon, and it's going to be one after another that's going to expose all of this that I think is going to change the argument on origin of life.
Well, you know, Jim, I think it already is changing the argument, and a lot of people at various conferences that I've talked to recently are aware that this debate's going on, and that you have been calling out the overhyping of these prebiotic simulation experiments. There is a huge disparity between what is told to the press and what is conveyed to students in textbooks and by popular YouTube bloggers and what the actual scientific evidence shows. And you've done a great job in exposing that disparity, and I think as a result of that, you've done a great service for science. And I know it is uncomfortable to have to take on someone who might not seem to be a worthy scientific interlocutor because he simply lacks the credentials and the expertise that you have. But it's necessary because some of those people operating in the internet environment have access to millions and millions of viewers, and they are conveying that very misinformation that you've been committed to exposing. So we commend you for that. Thank you for this really spirited interview, and we will be promoting the videos that you have coming out, including this first one in which you address the claims of Steve Benner in this longer lecture that you've given. I think it was at Rice with a student group, and we'll be promoting that and hoping that doing our best to get the word out about what the real state of the science is. So thanks very much for a good interview, and we'll do this again and talk about your next series of videos about the work of Lee Cronin, and then I think there's also some videos that you've done about how Professor Dave and others have misused the work of one of your former colleagues, Bruce Lipschitz, I think.
Yes, it was terrible what Dave Farina did to him, how Dave Farina portrayed his work.
Yeah, so we're going to sort all that out, but this video will be promoting your lecture on the work of Steve Benner and the whole controversy about building RNA molecules, and we'll call it good for today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to continue with part 2. Indeed.
And it's not because of you. My position on these things has brought attack from the scientific community. That's why I am locked and loaded. So if you think that I am being hard on people, trust me, I am an angel compared to the way that they treat me.
Hi, I'm Stephen Meyer, the director of the Center for Science and Culture here at Discovery Institute. Today we're going to do our second video podcast featuring Dr. James Tour of Rice University, organic chemist and nanotechnology specialist. Jim has been stirring things up a bit with his critique of origin of life research, and in our last episode we talked with him about some of the interactions he's had with origin of life researcher named Steve Benner. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the work of Lee Cronin and critiques that Jim has offered of Lee, and some of the videos that he's made in response to some of Lee Cronin's work. the purpose of these videos is to introduce our audience to the work of Jim Tour, to his interesting analysis and critique of origin of life research, and also provide some scientific background that will make it easier for people to understand the video lectures that he's produced. Jim, I think one of the interesting things about this debate as it's developed is that it was really sparked by an internet blogger who goes by the handle of Professor Dave. And I think you've been in, as we've discussed before, a bit of an awkward position in that Professor Dave is not an organic chemist. He's not an origin of life researcher. He's not a PhD scientist. I think he has a master's degree in science education, which is a perfectly wonderful vocation. But he's not a specialist in this area, and so he has made a lot of claims in response to you that you think are scientifically indefensible. But you've been in a difficult position to attack someone who's not a scientist and who's not really at your level in science. And so I think an interesting and exciting development is that in recent videos that Professor Dave has produced, he has cited other scientists, and in particular people doing origin of life research, in critique of you. And I think that's given you the opportunity to respond scientist to scientist, and so you're not, as it were, punching below your weight class, but actually taking on people who are worthy of critique from someone of your stature. So what we're going to do today is going to give you a chance to first summarize the arguments of Lee Cronin, who is one of Professor Dave's experts, and then respond and give people a little bit of a preliminary introduction to some of the more detailed content that you're putting out on the internet about this important debate, specifically in this case with Dr. Cronin. So he's produced 3 videos, or you have 3 videos in response to his work, and he's produced a bunch of, Professor Dave has produced videos about Lee Cronin, and the first of those doesn't really talk much about chemistry, but he uses a lot of analogies to get across the idea that it's really not going to be that hard to explain the origin of life. Can you talk a little bit about the first of those installments?
Okay, let me start out by saying that Lee and I have had discussions on Justin Brierley's program. I found him a nice person. We had a good civil discussion. He said some things on a program, Justin Brierley, that I'm trying to mislead people. I'm misleading people by what I'm saying, and then he got on another program with me, and we had a discussion. And on that program that I went on with him, after I pushed him, he said that the primordial soup model, which is a model where you have small molecules in some pool or pond, there's some lightning strikes, and that results in the formation of the molecules needed for cells, and those assemble into a cell, and you have life. And that is the beginning of life. And he says the primordial soup model is a good model. And so when I had this discussion with him, I was able to get him to the point of saying that we know that there were small molecules, we know that there was life, but we don't know how it happened. We don't know how
from the small molecules to the living cell.
Right. We really don't know how it happens. And I got him to go ahead and say that we don't know how it happens. Yet he then says that he continued on in Dave's program to push this idea that there is this model, and he gives examples. And I think, again, Lee is a nice person, and he gives examples from his own research that he says are suggestive of what could have happened in the primordial soup. My argument is that everything that he showed, that he spoke of in Dave Farina's video concerning what he's done in his own lab, is utterly ridiculous when it comes to life. When it comes to apply to life, the first thing that he did is he took some inorganic salts, some inorganic molybdenum salts, I believe they were, and he does something called autocatalysis. Autocatalysis was shown on inorganic complexes by a man named Oswald in about the 1920s, a long time ago, 100 years ago. There was nothing magical about that. He said it was mind-blowing. It was not mind-blowing. He said he was making houses and he was making skyscrapers.
What he meant by that is he is making things that are micron sized, things you cannot even see, but they were larger than the starting molecules that he had. So what is autocatalysis? It's when you have a template, when you have something that forms a template, and around this it catalyzes the formation of something that's like itself. But that new thing that is like itself, in his case, is a little bit bigger, and that becomes a template for the next one, and that's a template for the next one. And he says he's forming skyscrapers. When he says skyscrapers, he just means that it's micron size. He doesn't mean that it's literally skyscrapers or literally houses. And that has almost nothing to do with the origin of life. This is chemistry that was talked about literally 100 years ago by Oswald. And there's nothing special in this, and it has nothing to do with the origin of life. And he says it took no information, and this was.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if that's because the molecules that are being auto-catalyzed are not themselves relevant to the origin of life.
Yeah, the molecules are inorganic complexes that have absolutely nothing to do with the origin of life. They are not around the classes of molecules, organic molecules, that you need for life. They don't demonstrate anything that's relevant to life. There is nothing there. It's an interesting paper. It's an interesting paper from a chemical perspective that shows some templating effect. But that's it. This is a much harder thing to do when you're dealing with non-symmetrical molecules. He's dealing with symmetrical molecules, things that have high symmetry. When you're dealing with the organic molecules that make up life, you don't see these type of symmetry elements. And it has nothing to do with what's happening in organic systems. Organic systems are far more complex in setting them up. And so when he eventually gets to the organic systems, there's a lot more setup you have to do. And the so-called autocatalysis becomes far less interesting. So everything that Lee Cronin has published that he says has something to do with life has nothing to do with life. And the other two pieces we can talk about as you like. There were three papers that he talked about.
Yeah, but before we go there, though, let's just remind our audience of the four basic types of organic molecules that have to be made, because that will provide a little background for appreciating the critiques that you're offering. Because I think it's crucial to understand that in origin of life research, the object of explanation is the living cell. My PhD supervisor, who wrote on the origin of life, Harmka Kaminga, said that behind the question of the origin of life is the question of the nature of life. What is it, she said, what is it that we're trying to explain the origin of? Every origin of life researcher has to reckon with life as we know it. And so if you make high symmetry molecules, if you make essentially crystals of inorganic molecules, that's not relevant to life. We got to build different types of molecules that have different types of properties, including the ability to store information. So maybe a good place to start for our audience is just to review those four classes of molecules that are critical to making life as we know it.
Okay, there are the four classes of molecules. One is sugars, which are called carbohydrates or saccharides. It's all the same thing. Sugars, carbohydrates, saccharides, all the same thing. And the polymers made from those. And so that's one class based on the sugars. Another class is based on amino acids that polymerize to your proteins and your enzymes. So that's the second class that are based on amino acids. The third one is based on nucleotides, which are a sugar with a base, and a base meaning that it's a nitrogen-containing compound, and a phosphate group hanging off, and that's what makes up the DNA and the RNA. And then you have the lipids, which make up a lot of the bilayer, the surrounding, the shell of the cell, and the shell of the organelles that might be in the cell if you had a eukaryotic cell. Prokaryotes.
That's excellent.
Again,
so those are
those are the four classes.
Four classes, and so at a macro molecular level, you have the sugars, you have the proteins or enzymes, you have the nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, and then you have the lipids. And so you can't get anywhere if you can't build those molecules. And as I understand it, a big part of your critique has been that the undirected chemistry from smaller inorganic molecules does not spontaneously move in the direction of any of those life-relevant molecules. Is that, in the broadest sense, the problem that you're identifying?
Right. So in the broadest sense, if you use directed chemistry that's prebiotically relevant, meaning that you're using chemicals that would have been available on a prebiotic earth, so nothing that's been human designed, complex human designed, you're just using basic chemicals and what Steve Benner would call hands-off chemistry, where you're putting minimal input chemistry into it, you can't make any of these compounds that are in any state usable. You might make a trace of them in a sea of other molecules where you have much, much less than 1%. And so it becomes impossible to use it because it's already filled up with other molecules in it. What Lee Cronin does is he makes inorganic complexes which have nothing to do with any of the 4 classes of chemicals, like zero to do with any of the 4 classes of chemicals. So that's the problem with his first paper, which he said was mind-blowing, but it's actually utterly ridiculous. And that's what I show in my video. It's a bunch of nonsense.
And apparently irrelevant, because he's not building the chemicals that are actually present in living systems.
Correct. And he has no way of even projecting how that chemical would ever be relevant for any sort of living system. So it's just ridiculous, and it's amazing that the community, the Origin of Life community itself, didn't just fall over laughing when he made this relation to Origin of Life, which doesn't constitute the majority of his paper. The majority of his paper is very interesting chemistry. It's when he makes the relation to an Origin of Life type scenario. And so this is just a bunch of nonsense. And then he says this element, molybdenum, is like almost as abundant as iron, not as abundant as iron, but he has no reason to believe that this wouldn't work with iron. What is he talking about? This had nothing to do with a bunch of rust and iron oxide. He even refers to it as rust because it's a bunch of metal oxide. It has nothing to do with life, nothing. And and he knows what life is, because he has videos where he's even said, where you've got to have a cell. You've got to have homeostasis, where you have this internal working state. You got to be able to pass information on to offspring. He understands what life is, but then he makes a bunch of junk and he says, this is suggestive of life. That's the problem. Now, Lee's a nice guy, but it's because of him that people are so misled in this whole area of Origin of Life, where they think that it's already been solved.
You cite an interesting statistic, too, about how many people think that scientists have been able to mix molecules together in laboratories to produce single-celled life forms, such as bacteria. How many people, what percentage of the public believes that?
2/3. Over two-thirds of the percentage feel that think that scientists have made bacteria, mixed chemicals together to make simple single-cell organisms like bacteria. And this is totally untrue. In fact, 1/3 of the population thinks that scientists have made simple organisms, simple animals like frogs in the laboratory. So this is so far from the truth. And it's because of this loose talk of people like Lee Cronin, these sorts of experts, their loose talk in what they say, that it leads to this type of thing.
Well, let's talk about some more of the more specific scientific results that he's touted. We've talked about his ideas about autocatalysis and your explanation of why those are not relevant to explaining the origin of life. But he also has done some work on the foremost reaction, which is a reaction, as I understand it, that produces sugars and therefore could be conceivably relevant to prebiotic chemistry, because that is one of the 4 classes of molecules that need to be produced. What does he claim about this reaction, the foremost reaction, and what has he demonstrated in the laboratory about the plausibility of generating sugars through this reaction under prebiotic conditions?
So he takes some simple organic chemicals and lets it undergo a foremost reaction, and he himself even says that in seconds to hours, you get billions of different products. This is totally contrary to what Dave Farina teaches, and Dave didn't even know it. Dave, in the same
Hey,
video.
Jim, just before you go into that more, could you, just for our audience, explain in general terms what the foremost reaction is?
Foremost reaction is to take a simple aldehyde, a compound that has a carbon to a double bonded to an oxygen, along with an alcohol, and you polymerize these into the structure of carbohydrates, of sugars.
And are these two starting molecules inorganic or organic?
They're organic. So
They're organic. Okay.
you can take simple organic compound and polymerize it so it has an alcohol on it. It has an aldehyde on it, and you mix it. He mixes it with calcium hydroxide. Now, interestingly, in the very same video, Dave goes on to say that calcium hydroxide is irrelevant because it's too strong a base to really be widely available on an early Earth. He concedes that it's available. He wants to dismiss calcium oxide, but his expert comes on and uses calcium hydroxide, and he didn't even notice it. He put up a paper with Lee Cronin's work showing calcium hydroxide, and Dave didn't even notice it. So the poor man cannot even see calcium hydroxide in that paper. He doesn't even realize. And in fact, he cited another paper in his critique that also had calcium hydroxide. Even his own slide showed calcium hydroxide, and he said it was not relevant. And then when he later brought on Steve Benner, he used calcium hydroxide, and Dave didn't even notice it. So we're talking about a man who is utterly clueless on the topic of chemistry, trying to teach chemistry. Put Dave aside, now we're dealing with his so-called expert, Lee Cronin. So
what is Lee's claim about the foremost reaction and how it could have occurred on the early Earth and what he's getting out of his simulation of that?
So what Lee does is he tries to do the foremost reaction, but he keeps dumping in more and more of the starting material. And he says as it goes through these recursive cycles, it cleans itself up. It starts clean, you get less compounds. So in other words, you initially get billions of compounds, but he makes it less billions by somehow cleaning it up.
And the billions are a problem because you don't want lots and lots of things besides the sugars. You just want the sugars that are life relevant. If you have a lot of other byproducts, they're gonna interact with each other, and you're going to move in a life unfriendly direction. Having lots of things is a problem, not a good thing, right?
Right. You actually gum up the works. That's why chemists in a laboratory will work very hard to minimize the number of byproducts. This is what you spend most of your time on, trying to minimize the number of byproducts and maximize the compound that you want. And so what Lee does is he gets billions and billions of compounds. He can see, say, 1,000 of those, because under those 1,000 dots or spots, there's many others under there that he can't detect because they all co-elute. They all come overlapping with each other. And then he dumps in more and more material going through these recursive cycles. And he says, you see, I'm getting less dots here. I'm getting less compounds. That's not the case, because if you read his experimental literature, the experimental, which Dave never read, he says that he takes off 70% of the supernatant, the things that are floating in the solution, it's suspended in the solution, and the things that are precipitating out fall out of the solution, and he doesn't use those. So in other words, the reason he gets less material is because these compounds are polymerizing, they're falling out, and he's only skimming off the top. So of course
he's skimming essentially the waste byproducts out of the resulting system, and then that allows him to concentrate the one thing he's looking for, and to get fewer interfering.
Right. But not the one thing. He's concentrating maybe 100 billion things into 99 billion things.
Okay.
So
he really hasn't solved the problem. He's only made it minimally less destructive.
Because he cut out 30% of his solution. If you cut out 30% of the products that precipitate it out, you're going to clean it up. And the more times you do that, but you have to keep adding.
So this is not a naturally recursive system. This is an intelligently intervened. He's intelligently intervening to clean things up so that he's gradually purifying his reaction product.
I think you're being very kind by even saying that this is an intelligent method. It is not an intelligent method. You are speaking of intelligence as adding some user input into the system, but it's too flattering of a word.
I really hope you enjoy the conversation. But did you catch that the first time I'm seeing her, rather the second time I'm seeing her, right away after the wedding, she complained. All right. Here's your conversation back.
Word, Steve. It's too flattering of a word for what's being done here. So there's nothing intelligent about this. He's just letting the polymers crash out, and then he has to keep adding in more and more starting material. Where do you get boatloads of more and more starting material to start dumping into this? Pure starting material you dump in. And then he gets out so many products, he can't even analyze which isomer he's got. And then he says, well, we have identified a compound that looks like ribose, but I'm telling you, the man has billions of compounds in there. That would be totally unusable. Did he ever use the ribose for anything? No. Why not? Because he can't separate that ribose from anything. You can't even separate it, even with the most advanced techniques that we have today. He used something that was called ultra high pressure liquid chromatography, liquid chromatography, which is the most complex method we have to separate compounds in an analytical, not a preparative column, but an analytical, meaning you get traces of the material. He couldn't even separate it out. He even
and again,
says
if you don't separate it out, you're going to get interfering cross reactions that are going to create sludge that have nothing to do with life. That's
exactly. Yeah. It doesn't do anything. And Lee understands this because he has other videos where he says, you might find one molecule of something in interstellar space that might be life relevant, but it's not good for anything because it's mixed in with many other molecules. So he understands this.
He understands the problem.
Yes, he understands the problem. Yet
I
he
have a
goes
quote
ahead
from
and
him
makes
here,
this.
Jim. He says, all the people that have made life in the lab have cheated.
Yes. Yes.
So he first of all, we haven't made life in the lab. That's absurd. All the people who have made life-friendly chemicals in the lab, I suppose he could say. But he acknowledges the cheating, but not about his own work? What's going on?
Right. So he said all the people who have made life in the lab have cheated because they've used molecules that have come from naturally occurring cellular sources. Number one, even if you use molecules that come from cellular sources, they've never made life in the lab. So he has a lot of loose talk that confuses society. Nobody's made life in the lab. And so, as you know, on my video series, that I really drive that point home, that his loose talk, he's responsible for people thinking that people have made life in the lab because he went around saying it. And he understands the magnitude of the problem. He's nowhere close. He said in 2011 that he'd make life in his lab in 2 years. And he didn't, it's 2 years past 2011. I mean, we're 11 years, almost 12 years past 2011, and he hasn't yet done it. So this is such loose talk that he comes out with. And why should Lee Cronin be surprised that Jim Tour is reacting to this? Everybody should react to this. Any chemist would react to this if they followed this work. Nobody's made life in the lab. The junk that he made in that foremost reaction is utter junk. It's not useful for anything. It's no good.
Well, let's talk about his an additional video that Professor Dave has come out with, touting some of Lee Cronin's other work on apparently simulating how whole cells divide. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about those claims, and then we'll get into analyzing them as well?
Okay, so he claims that the most important thing in his laboratory is bubbles and salad dressing. Like when you shake up salad dressing, you get bubbles, and that's very important for the origin of life. Now, most of those bubbles are not formed necessarily through a lipid bilayer. They are not a vesicle. They're just a single layer. But if you wanted to form a lipid bilayer, you generally have to take lipids, which are a polar head group, which means something that's solubilizing in water, and you'd have two tails hanging off it, and it's called a diacetyl lipid.
you can take these things and you have to put them under shear, which means that you put them between two plates and you drive them together, and you can form what are called vesicles, which are water droplets surrounded by two layers of these lipids. One layer is facing inward, one layer is facing outward. And there is something called a Marangoni effect, which has been known for a long, long time. If you take oil and you let these oil droplets form larger and larger, they will eventually break to minimize the free energy of the surface, minimize the surface free energy, and they will break. And once they break, they form smaller bubbles. There are elementary videos on the internet that show this Marangoni effect. Well, what Lee does is he makes a lipid. It's not a diacetyl lipid, it's a mono, it's got one chain, and he says he makes this by an autocatalytic reaction. Even if it were autocatalytic, it's totally uninteresting. Even if the kinetics for the formation were shown to be autocatalytic, it would be totally uninteresting. But even if it were autocatalytic, then he says, and these form these vesicles, and these vesicles break and they divide, much like a cell divides in life. No, he doesn't have symmetrical division. There is no DNA in these cells. There is no splitting of the DNA to go from one side and the other, and then this cleavage right in the middle to have a duplicate copy of this vesicle. It's just a bunch of junk. It's a bunch of Marangoni effect, where you're just taking these lipids and you're just breaking them by you have this natural breaking to minimize the free energy. This has nothing to do with life. This is not how cells work. Cells have a very orchestrated pattern for cellular division. They have to duplicate the genome, put it on each half. They have to take the alignment, the interactomes that we talked about last time. Mm-hmm. These have to split to each side of the cell, and then it divides in the middle. There's this high specificity that concentrates this reaction in the middle to make sure that you get an even division. What he gets is totally uneven division, and he says that this is showing some forms of protocells, and these are dividing. Oh, look at them, how interesting they are. They're dividing. They have nothing to do with life. This is like an elementary school video. Really, it's an elementary school video.
He depicts a process that actually has no relevance to how life actually works.
Right.
So he's done a good job of explaining what doesn't need to be explained.
And the lipids that he made for this, that he says, these just form spontaneously, 10 pages, single-spaced, of complex modern organic chemical reactions using modern chemical reagents to set up the system to make the lipids that form these vesicles. It's 10 pages.
So Lee Cronin makes the lipids through
he makes the
complex
lipids
with a complex chemical recipe.
Complex organic synthesis, yes. So he has an army of people. He has a very big research group, and God bless those young people. It's just a shame what he has them doing, because they think they're doing something that's really relevant. He's trying to convince them of this, and I'm sure they're very smart because they can do really interesting synthesis. But 10 pages of organic synthesis they do in order to set a system up that would possibly do his autocatalysis. It's been totally set up, and it's a really uninteresting. It's just a simple little condensation reaction.
So the most interesting thing is the organic synthesis that's being performed by the organic chemists in Lee Cronin's lab. It's not the what happens to the vesicles at the very end of the process.
Yeah, and he sets up a little robot with an XY movable system that can squirt these little droplets into water from a chloroform solution and into water, and then he has a camera below it so you can watch these little droplets. And so he has a whole nother part of his team. Again, these are great analytical and chemists that can build this equipment. Really interesting. But everything is loaded. The organic chemistry is loaded. The setup is loaded to make his vesicles. That's loaded. And all he's showing is a simple Marangoni effect, which is a bunch of ridiculous nonsense.
But all the preliminary steps to this are intelligently designed by the chemists in the laboratory to get to that point where then they can demonstrate this Marangoni effect.
Yes, and so the effect that they
So
demonstrate
this is not something that would
elementary.
happen on the early Earth absent help.
No, I mean you might get a Marangoni effect with a bunch of junk, because Marangoni effect happens all the time if you have oil droplets in water. But what he set up, no way. This is totally ridiculous. This has nothing to do with how cells divide. Nothing. This is just a simple little experiment, and what he had to do to set this up. So God bless
But the
man.
lipids that he is using are actually in some way relevant or similar to the lipids that would be in the bilayer?
No, they're totally unlike what is in an actual lipid bilayer. In an actual lipid bilayer, you have what are called diacetyl lipids. You have a glycerol that you are distinguishing the two ends of the glycerol that are enantiotopic, and you have to somehow distinguish those two ends. And then you have to put on lipid chains, many of them having stereogenic centers that are homochiral. The lipid itself is often homochiral, and it has two chains hanging off. He made ones with one chain without the glycerol component on it.
And were they homochiral or?
No, there
okay.
was no chirality to them. No
Okay,
chirality.
so they
to
were
them.
at least at best weakly analogous to the kinds of lipids that you find in the lipid bilayer in a cell, and they were themselves the product of organic synthesis produced by a whole host of very smart chemists.
You're again being too gracious.
By too nice?
Too nice. You're saying they're weakly analogous. No, they're not analogous at all. They're not two chains, they're one chain. And it's been shown if you only have one chain hanging down, you don't have the stability you need for life. Secondly, his two layers, his inside layer and his outside layer for his vesicle, are the same. You could never have that in a living cell. You have to have a proton gradient. The inside layer and the outside layer of the vesicle have to be different. Nobody knows how to make them like that. Only do you find these in nature. Only do you find these in cells. You don't find these when there's no life around. Only living organisms make this. We don't know how to do this in the laboratory. He didn't have the inside and the outside different. If you don't have the inside and the outside different, there's no proton gradient, there's no life. So
okay, so this is really fascinating. So let's just summarize here. So if we go back to our original idea that to explain the origin of life, you have to explain the origin of the kind of things that make life today. You have to explain the classes of molecules that we see in actual cells, and eventually their arrangement and organization in relation to each other. So in Cronin's experiment, he purports to show how, purports to have found a process that is analogous to cell division. It's not analogous to actual cell division. He purports to do so with lipid molecules that are analogous to actual lipids that are used in the lipid bilayer in cells, but they're not analogous. And even to the extent he's been able to make those molecules, the process by which he's done that has been totally dependent, not on purely undirected natural processes of the kind that would be at work on a prebiotic Earth, but rather by the intelligent design of organic synthesis chemists who do organic synthesis in the laboratory. Is that basically what we've got?
Yes, using modern methods of synthesis and using multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment to do the analytical separations and analyses.
So that sounds like Dr. Cronin is cheating too. He says he critiques other people for cheating, but it sounds like he might have been doing a little cheating himself.
He cheats every step. He cheats every step. He cheats. If you say that this thing could be valid for anything relevant to an earlier, and Lee's not stupid. No way.
It sounds like he's very intelligent. To me, the very interesting thing is that the scientists seem to be inured or unaware of the role their own intelligence is playing in the success, the claimed success of their experiments.
Yes,
they forget that their own hands and minds are active in producing the results that they tout in their scientific papers.
You're again being very generous. And let me just say that Lee Cronin is not stupid. I am not suggesting that, not at all. I think he's very smart, but I think that he's gone way overboard with his extrapolations from the simple little chemistry that he does that is not even prebiotically relevant, and then the suggestions that he then makes from that are just way overboard. And I don't think that Dave Farina is stupid, not at all. I've never called him stupid. He repeats over and over again that I've called him stupid. I have never called Dave Farina stupid. In fact, I don't think he's stupid.
And but he's bought into this stuff that people like Lee Cronin are saying. So Dave Farina is a victim. That's what Dave Farina is, and he's an enabler by giving voice to these people because he's been so victimized.
Making these extravagant claims. Well, let's talk about one other scientific aspect of this, which I think is so fascinating, because we've all heard from high school biology on the story of the origin of life in the prebiotic soup. Darwin talked about life arising in a warm little pond. He couldn't give any kind of detail to that speculation in a letter that he wrote to a friend, Joseph Hooker, back in the 1860s. But it's been pretty much our kind of the cultural motif or icon about how this happened. Is we've imagined chemicals arranging themselves in the early Earth ocean or in warm little ponds or something. But it turns out that it's actually very difficult to make some of the key classes of molecules in the presence of water. In particular, amino acids that need to link together to form proteins. Can you explain a bit about why that is the case chemically, and what chemists have tried to do to simulate the origin of amino acids and proteins, given that we commonly imagine that there was some kind of prebiotic ocean or soup that was the place where life began?
There was a very interesting reaction in the 1950s by Miller and Urey, where they took some simple organic compounds and some voltage spikes, and they were able to get a number of organic compounds, some of those being amino acids. And they had several of the amino acids formed. They're relatively simple molecules. But in every case, their amino acids were not chiral. They were not homochiral. They were all racemic, which means that you have the two
Jim,
hands.
if you don't mind, just to remind our audience, the chirality idea is that there's a left-handed and right-handed version. There's mirror image versions of the molecules. And for reasons that have been recently discovered, the only one type of those key biomolecules are present in living organisms. For example, with the amino acids, you only have left-handed amino acids that form actual proteins in living organisms. And so you're saying that when Miller and Urey did their experiment, they got some of the protein-forming amino acids, 2 or 3, I think, as I remember.
More than that. They
weren't exclusively left-handed amino acids. Is that?
Yeah. So people have gone back with better analytical methods and found more in these. But yeah, they were not just left-handed. They were all racemic, so they would not have been good for anything.
Okay.
And even if you could get some of them to crystallize separately from the others in a homochiral form, how do you now get them to hook up? So what Lee did is he bought all the homochiral amino acids that had been made from living systems. They were generated from living system chemistry or from enzymes that come from living systems.
But we're trying to explain the origin of life from non-living chemicals.
Right.
But to simulate the origin of life from non-living chemicals, he's having to get chemicals from already living organisms.
Exactly. The same thing he accuses other people of doing, that he says, and you've created life using the such and such chemicals. Now he's doing the same thing. So he's taking these chemicals. He's not making life. So what he does is he says that he's going to get these things to polymerize in water. But he starts his paper out saying that they don't polymerize in water. He says even the basic experiments where people have claimed this on surfaces, which Dave Farina references, he says this doesn't work. You don't get anything longer than 3 because the thermodynamics are against you. Lee teaches that the equilibrium lies to the left, lies to the starting material. Dave Farina, in the very same video says it's not a matter of equilibrium. And then he brings on an expert who says it's all about equilibrium. Dave didn't even notice. That's the amazing thing. Poor Dave.
Jim, just a second.
He didn't even notice.
Yeah, I get the contradiction, but let's unpack that a little bit. So the presence of water if you have amino acids in an aqueous solution in the presence of water, they will not, for energetic reasons, hook up to more than polymerize means hook up into chains. They won't form chains longer than 2 or 3
and
amino
because
acids.
They keep breaking up. It's preferred for them to break up rather than to hook up.
Energetically preferred.
And energetically preferred. And there's both thermodynamic and kinetic reasons for that.
And Dave says that the system forms the polymers, forms the amino acids. He says the reaction is exergonic. He doesn't even know what exergonic means. The reaction is not exergonic. It's just the opposite of exergonic. It's endogonic. What happens is, as soon as he said exergonic means delta G. He's talking about the free energy, a term called delta G, the Gibbs free energy of the reaction. As soon as you reference delta G, it means you're talking about an equilibrium reaction. So in one breath, Dave says it has nothing to do with equilibrium. He says the reaction is exergonic. That's like saying it is black, it is white. And he didn't even notice it.
So
if something has a delta G, it has to have an equilibrium. But the thing is, he had it the wrong way. The equilibrium lies to the starting material side, and Lee's own paper, which Dave puts in his video, says this. So what I did is I didn't bring in any more papers. No, I didn't bring in any more papers. I used the very videos that Dave brought into his series, or that his experts brought into those series, and I showed that every paper that Dave showed in his video, he interpreted wrongly. That very paper that he says the reaction is exergonic, as soon as you look on the first page, it says the delta G is positive. When delta G is positive, it's not. Yes, it's endogonic. It's not exergonic.
Okay.
So
if
he had
the
it totally
equilibrium
backwards.
lies, if you're saying on the left-hand side of the
To the
equation
starting
with the
material,
starting
right.
materials, that means the starting materials aren't going to arrange themselves into more complex compounds. Is that?
That's right. They are not going to go, and they don't couple, and so they don't couple. The amino acids don't couple. So what Lee does is he gets rid of the water. So Dave says, you see, Lee can have these form in water. But then Lee goes on to say he heats them up. Well, Dave had to read the paper to see how high he heats them up. Lee says, we take these compounds, we heat them up, they form the polymers, and then he says we heat them up, we dry them out, we form the polymers, and then we add water, they depolymerize a bit, but then we do it again and they keep getting larger. You read the experimental and you see he didn't just heat them up. He cooked them to absolute dryness. He heated them up to 130 degrees centigrade. What's magical about that number? Because if you are over 125 degrees centigrade, you are at sterilization temperatures. So if ever life wanted to form, not going to be able to form, because Lee said your days warm up during the day and they cool down at night. That's the simulation. Okay, so you want your days to warm up to 130 degrees centigrade during the day, then there's no life could ever form, because if something tried to form, you sterilized it. Poor Dave didn't even know it because he never looked at the experimental, so he was hoodwinked by Lee Cronin's
This is
silly little
fascinating,
chemistry.
Jim.
Yeah.
So okay, there was a couple, let me put this in a couple different contexts. First, the scientific, and then we'll get to the rhetorical. Okay, the scientific is that we've learned for years that life arose in a warm little pond or in the prebiotic ocean, but rarely are we told that one of the most important organic molecules, amino acids that form proteins, will not polymerize, will not link up in the presence of water. The energetics are such that those starting materials, amino acids, will not link. The energy, the thermodynamics is against that. So that's something that's kind of shocking in a way, because we have this cultural story about how life began, and the very most basic aspect of it turns out to be chemically implausible.
Correct.
So that's one thing. Then scientifically, what Lee Cronin does to overcome that hurdle, which he recognizes as real, is that he has these wet and dry cycles where he tries to heat things up and then cool things off to try to get the amino acids to link up. But the temperature to which he has to heat them is above the sterilization temperature, which would kill all life.
Correct.
So you can't, if that's what you're simulating in order to get the amino acids to link up, you're also simulating the destruction of all life.
Correct.
So that's going to be kind of self-defeating simulation. It's not demonstrating what you actually want it to. You might have gotten 2 amino acids to link up, or 3 or 4 or 5, but you're not getting any closer to life. You're actually destroying all life on the planet as you move forward, and destroying the conditions under which life, the further chemical evolution of life, could proceed.
Right, and you philosophers probably have some term for that.
Well, we'll think of one, but I want to get to the rhetoric of this now. So scientifically, I think we got a good idea what's going on. Again, it sounds an awful lot like...
But let me mention one other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
He heats it to 130 degrees. So so when you sterilize something, you heat to 125 degrees or higher for 15 minutes. He heated it for 15 hours at 130 degrees. This is just absolutely crazy. But we still have to talk about the specificity of the hookup, because I haven't talked about that yet.
It's not just good enough to get the amino acids to hook up. They've got to hook up in the right arrangement.
They have to hook up in the right way.
So they form chains that will fold into functional proteins.
Right. So half of the amino acids, instead of having just one end hooking to another end, just having an A and a B that are hooking up together like this, forefinger to thumb. No, a lot of them have another group hanging off. Half of the amino acids have another functional group hanging off. That then competes for this main chain. As soon as those start competing, you don't have a polypeptide anymore. You have junk. So when Lee used those amino acids, so generally people don't even use those amino acids that have the extra chain because they just can't deal with it. So when we make synthetic polypeptides in the lab, we will protect that so that it doesn't react. When you're in nature, so these compete, and as soon as one competes, that's it.
You get some peptide linkages, but some non-peptide
linkages. That are in there that shouldn't be there.
And you can't form a protein if you have any non-peptide linkages. If things are coming off at odd angles.
Those are never formed by ribosomes. Those always form afterward during the protein folding step, to get the protein to fold into a proper configuration. If you have those in the main chain, in the peptide, the N terminus to the C terminus, you interject
will not
those,
make a protein.
You're gone. Just one of those, you're done.
One of them.
You're toast.
Yeah.
You're toast. That's it. It's done.
So again,
Game
another
over.
specificity
Game over.
requirement that cannot be met by undirected chemistry, or has not been met.
And Lee notices this. Lee says, and he says, well, we did get some linear ones. He doesn't know. He gets all of this junk. It's junk. That's why I say it's utter junk. What Lee even made in his unreasonable conditions, first of all, buying all the homochiral amino acids, buying them in homochiral pure form. He didn't make them with some silly little prebiotic reaction, Miller-Urey reaction. If Miller-Urey was so good, why didn't he use that? He didn't, because he knows that doesn't work. So he bought these. Then even when he bought these, he went ahead and he tried to polymerize these. He had to use these crazy high temperatures, which would never be relevant. And then what he got was junk. So every phase of it is cheating and junk, cheating and junk. That's what Lee Cronin did, cheating and junk all the way along. And poor Dave Farina is the victim. And then he enabled Lee Cronin to put this out there as if it was relevant.
Exactly, and I want to talk a bit about the rhetorical dimension of this, because a lot of people watching this will wonder, well, why is Professor Tour so passionate about this? Well, because first of all, he knows the organic chemistry, and he knows these guys are pulling the wool over the eyes of the public. But also, he didn't start this fight. I'm defending you now, Jim. You didn't.
Yes.
You were attacked by a guy with hundreds of thousands, more than 1 million, I think, some of his viewers who come to him for. This is Professor Dave. Come to Professor Dave for science education. And he used that platform to specifically attack you for being ignorant and or dishonest in your critiques of these origin of life researchers.
Both ignorant and dishonest. That's
Both
what he's
ignorant
told.
and
He says
dishonest.
that I'm actively lying. I am inept and I'm actively lying, Dave Farina says.
But I think and I'm going to opine here, but just having listened to you in the last episode and in the time we've been together on this one, it's pretty obvious you know organic chemistry and organic synthesis, and also you know a lot about what would be required to build an actual living cell. And these prebiotic simulation experiments are either producing things that aren't relevant to living cells, or they're cheating, or more likely they're doing both. Cheating in the sense that the intelligent agent is using a complex recipe of his or her own design, is buying purified reagents off the shelf and is using sophisticated organic synthesis techniques that would not be available to undirected, simpler molecules on a prebiotic herb. So at every step of the way, this is really suspect science. So I think it's fascinating. We're delighted to give you a chance to provide the other side of this story. The last thing I want to ask you about is is the deepest problem of all that's long fascinated me, which is the information problem. And this, we'll go back to we're moving back from the rhetoric to the science now, but you're showing that the building homochiral amino acids under prebiotic simulation in realistic conditions is not plausible.
Nobody's
linking the amino acids together is very difficult, if not impossible, to do on prebiotic conditions. Even a little water messes the whole thing up. And we've heard about how life began in a warm little pond in a prebiotic ocean for years. Even if you get things to link up, they're linked up with the wrong orientation, not with exclusively peptide bonds. But what about the even more difficult problem of getting the right sequence of the 20 different amino acids to form so that the right kind of interactions between them will cause them to fold into three-dimensional shapes that will perform proteins? Have prebiotic chemists made any progress on this sequence specificity problem, or sometimes called the information problem? We call it the information problem because in living cells, the information in the DNA directs the synthesis of the protein molecules amino acid by amino acids to ensure that the right sequence of amino acids are linked together. But in a prebiotic context, is there any process that can help us solve that information problem?
Zero. They have made zero progress on this, and I mean literally none. Nobody knows how to control the arrangement of these. Nobody knows how to control the arrangement. What they will say is that the proteins came from an RNA template, and that RNA template might have been the original form, but then how do you get the RNA to arrange with the information? And Dave says, I don't know what I'm talking about with information. Lee Cronin says, I don't know what I'm talking about with information. Yet they have never put forward where the information comes from, because you have to have specified information to have the arrangements of the amino acids for a protein to fold. And as Lee Cronin has said himself, you might get one protein made, but that wouldn't do it. The one molecule would never be enough. It would never be enough. And these things don't mimic themselves. They don't make themselves. People will say RNA duplicates itself. It does not. It does not duplicate itself. What has only been done is you get very small portions of it duplicated, less than 10%, and only when they've been highly programmed, engineered to try to
They even call the scientists who do this work call themselves ribozyme engineers. Yeah. So they're engineering the molecules, which is there's a quotation in Origin of Life research literature that's often taken as canonical in the sense that it really defines what has to be the problem that has to be solved. It's from Bernd Olaf Küppers, a German Origin of Life biochemist. He says the origin of life is basically equivalent to the problem of the origin of biological information. Now you've shown that it's equivalent to actually far more than that. You've got to just building the molecules or the subunits out of which the information-bearing molecules are formed is extremely difficult and has not been demonstrated under realistic prebiotic conditions. But the problem of the information at the higher level has not. You're saying there's been absolutely no progress on that whatsoever.
Correct. There's been no progress on this whatsoever. So Origin of Life people, as far as I see, they never address it. They can't even get the medium made upon which the information is stored.
Very well said.
We have to have a medium to store it, and the medium is secondary. The information is primary. We can't even get the medium upon which to store the information.
That's right. Well, as you know, I wrote a whole book about the information problem called Signature in the Cell, but it's extremely enlightening for me to talk to you about the problems at the lower levels of getting the medium made, or the molecules, the smaller level molecules made. We are delighted to host this series of videos because we think this content is so important, and we also want to make clear that we are delighted that Professor Dave has initiated this critique of Dr. Tour. I mentioned in the last video that we produced that I had a supervisor when I was doing my PhD work in Cambridge who used to say, beware the sound of one hand clapping. There's an argument on one side, there's bound to be an argument on the other. And that one of the best ways to test the strength of an argument is to see how well it withstands critical scrutiny. Now, there's a complex dialectic here. I'm not sure who started the argument exactly, but Dr. Tour certainly has been critiquing publicly these origin of life simulation experiments. In response to that, Professor Dave has attacked Professor Tour. In response to that, there's been some back and forth. What we're delighted to do here is to present some of this back and forth so that you, our audience, are in a position to evaluate who has the stronger argument. My views on this are probably pretty clear. I think Dr. Tour is one of the world's finest organic chemists. He knows what he's talking about, and the critiques he's making are very compelling. But you can decide, and you now have the wherewithal to do that, in that not only are we producing videos that are putting some of this discussion in context, but Dr. Tour has a whole series of videos in response, not just to Professor Dave, but to the experts upon which he has based his critique. And so you can evaluate both sides of this argument for yourself. And we're hoping that lots of you have the patience to view these and then follow up with looking at Dr. Tour's videos and comparing them to the content that's already out there online from Professor Dave Farina. So
if I could mention, Steve, that on my YouTube channel, Dr. James Tour. So if you go to YouTube, just type in Dr. James Tour, you will see this series. So I already had a series on origin of life. It's actually a 13-part series on origin of life where I describe all of these basic problems. In response to that, Dave Farina came out with a 2-part where he brought in experts. And so I go right after the experts. I think, but it may, my video series on these experts is going to come out very soon. It might even come out before this video that we're making right now, that I'm making with you, Steve. So, but in any case, this is going to be out there. So if you just watch Dr. James Tour, go there and subscribe. You'll see when these things come out. And I'm taking on the experts. We are going to take them out one by one. We are just going to take them down because Dave Farina,
in the intellectual sense, of course.
Yeah, in the intellectual sense, one by one, we're going to take them out.
Answer the arguments.
Yes,
and this is fascinating because what we have now is the internet has become a place where a very spirited scientific argument is taking place about one of the most fundamental questions that science has ever raised, which is what caused life on Earth to arise. This is a question of immense scientific interest. It has larger philosophical implications, and so it really is worth the back and forth that's going on here. Jim Tour, Professor Dave, right. Jim Tour, and now Professor Dave citing the experts doing origin of life research and Tour responding to them.
Yeah, so I'm responding to his experts, and I agree with you. I thank God for Dave Farina. I mean, without him, I would have just, I wouldn't have bothered with this thing. It's because of Dave Farina. We have Dave Farina to thank for all of these videos coming out.
He's created a tremendous platform for discussing a really foundational and important issue that is both scientific and philosophical in character. I think it's one of the most interesting subjects in science that you could study. I did a PhD on origin of life biology in a philosophy of science department. It's one of the really great questions. So we're actually delighted that this argument has been joined on all sides, and we hope that people will follow up watching this video by having a look at the series, the new series that Dr. Tour has released. Again, at
Dr. James Tour, Dr. James Tour, Dr. James Tour,
Dr. James Tour,
Dr. James Tour. No, just go to YouTube. Just type in, once you're on YouTube, type in Dr. James Tour, and my YouTube video homepage will come up, and you'll see the whole series will be coming out there.
That's just fantastic. So we highly recommend that. We thank everyone for watching, and we'll sign off here.
We do not know how life formed. We just do not know. There's so many problems we do not know. We know.